Hello and welcome, I'm Sean Fox, this is Made to Ramble, and in this episode we'll be talking about this little fella. This is the 9 to 18mm Olympus, and for a budget lens, this little beauty is punching well above its weight. Now before we get into talking about the lens, I just kind of wanted to mention that I've filmed this video twice now. I made a really stupid mistake the last time, and I just figured I might as well talk about that to start with. You see, at first glance, these videos probably look pretty straightforward to make. You throw a camera on a tripod and away you go. But in reality, there's a whole lot more effort that goes into these than what you might imagine. For instance, you probably don't realize that I'm practically sitting in a doorway here, or that the camera is out in the hall. See? The reason why I do this is because the room is pretty small and I'm wanting to blur the background just a little so as to remove any distractions. I also clean up quite a bit, anywhere that's going to be visible. I really wouldn't like to be that idiot who accidentally leaves a giant rubber butt plug in the background. Pretty much everything I do here is a deliberate choice. I'm lit by the window, the background is blurred enough to give a sense of location while removing any details which might distract from what I'm talking about. You can see my collection of lenses and cameras in the background, the computer and a guitar on the wall, so you know this is an office studio space, and you can also tell that I'm into music and photography, of course, but at the same time you really can't tell what lenses or cameras I happen to have back there. Anyway, you see my point. I put a fair amount of effort into setting up these videos and getting everything to look just right. So what did I forget last time? It turns out I forgot to look in the mirror first. I mean, look at that. I am covered in dog fur. I look like I have a hairy chest on the outside of my shirt. I don't even have a hairy chest on the inside of my shirt. Anyway, I figured there was probably some value in giving some insight into how these videos are made, especially given that a fair few people watching this video are probably interested in doing a little vlogging themselves. And for that purpose, the Olympus 9 to 18mm is a pretty good choice. As luck would have it, while recently in Kalbarri, I made the stupid mistake of leaving behind my Metabone speed booster, which meant that I had no way of mounting my beloved 18 to 35mm Sigma on the GH5. That meant that the only lenses I had with me were the little kit lens that comes with the GX85 and this little fella, the 9 to 18mm. So, as it turns out, this lens pretty much lived on my GH5, giving me plenty of opportunity to put it through its paces. So let's get the obvious out of the way. This is a cheap lens. It certainly doesn't have the build quality of an Olympus Pro lens. It's very plasticky. It has a variable aperture which really isn't wide enough for low light or astrophotography. The focus ring isn't buttery smooth, and it has this weird little mechanism that has to be extended before you can actually use the lens. It does mean that it's nice and small when it's packed away, but once you're using the lens, it's a little longer. It's still a pretty small lens though. Brand new, I think you're still paying around 600 Australian dollars for one of these, but there's plenty floating around on the used market, and I managed to pick mine up for around $200. Definitely worth keeping an eye out for. So, with most of the negatives there out of the way, let's talk about the features that I really love about this lens. Small, it's light. I don't have a lot of experience using ultra wide angles. There's definitely a knack to composing your shots with one of these, but I'm mostly using this lens for vlogging and also for capturing landscapes, both photo and video. So for me, one of the most important features that it really needs to have is a front filter thread so that I can mount my ND filters. If you compare all of the ultra-wide zooms available in the Micro Four Third lineup, this is one of only 2 lenses that has a front filter thread, and the other lens is almost twice the price. So if you're looking for a wide-angle zoom and you need to mount filters on the front, unless you're willing to spend around 1200 Australian, this is really your only option. But don't despair too much, it's a pretty good option. 9 to 18mm is equivalent in full frame terms to an 18 to 36mm. I'm sure there are those who would prefer a wider zoom, but for my own uses this is a pretty practical focal range. You can get a lot in your shot at the wide end, and 36mm is a pretty good kind of standard focal length for street photography and just general use. The aperture is 4 on the wide end and 5.6 on the long, so you're not going to get a lot of shallow depth of field, but it's an ultra wide, so you wouldn't be expecting that anyway. That said, with a little effort you can still get a bit of background blur. So now for the most obvious question, how's the image sharpness? Well, I'm not a pixel peeper myself, so I didn't spend any time photographing brick walls so that I could measure the sharpness from corner to corner, but I found that for my purposes the 9 to 18mm performed admirably. I was impressed with the amount of detail that I was able to capture in the landscapes, and I never really noticed any issues with softness at all. I did expect there to be some issues with flaring, given that the lens doesn't actually ship with a lens hood, but I kept looking through all of my shots and I haven't been able to find a single example of flaring that was produced over those 3 days while I was using this lens, so go figure. Nor did I notice anything much in the way of chromatic aberration, and the distortion is pretty well controlled as well. I imagine that's probably been corrected in camera with software, but it's effective nonetheless. This was my first time using the Panasonic GH5 with a wide angle lens, and while I've normally been blown away by the performance of the IBIS during video, I was surprised to find that it doesn't perform nearly as well with a wide angle lens. There's an almost kind of jello effect in the corners. I'm not sure if others have had the same experience, but I'd be very curious to know. If you've had the same issue yourself, please do let me know in the comments below. Well, that's really all that I had to say on this lens. It's definitely worth keeping an eye out for on the second-hand market. You can pick up a bargain. And if you're in the market for an ultra-wide zoom, don't be too quick to dismiss this option. It's a surprisingly decent performer. Anyway, I'll have another video out in about 2 weeks' time, so keep an eye out for that. If you get a chance, please do check out the new website. That's made2ramble.com. I just put up a new blog on there a couple of days ago. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button or let me know in the comments, and I'll see you again soon.